C5 Corvette lives up to the Corvette tradition of exceptional handling, uncompromised performance, and of course, the stunning Corvette look. Another tradition of the Corvette is that it leads the way with cutting-edge technology. This holds true in every Corvette system, including the new Getrag Differential. This differential uses the latest technology to provide performance that is strong, quiet, and efficient. However, the unique design of the Getrag Differential means that unique special tools and procedures are needed when the unit requires service. This video will show you the tools and explain their use. Let's begin by reviewing the disassembly of the differential and how to use the special service tools during this process. After draining and removing the differential from the vehicle, remove the left side carrier cover and attach the J-44616 holding fixture to the carrier using 4 cover bolts in the holes provided. Once the holding fixture is attached, mount the differential into the J-3289-20 holding fixture. Next, remove the vehicle speed sensor. Then, remove the right side carrier cover. In order to remove the ring gear and differential case, the right side transmission mounting stud needs to be removed. This is done using a lock nut arrangement on the stud. Now, remove the stud retaining plate bolts and the stud retaining plate. After removing the C-clip from the right output shaft, use differential lifting tool J-42155 to lift the ring gear and differential case assembly out of the carrier. Now, remove the rear differential carrier cover. After removing the pinion cartridge bolts, it may be necessary to heat the outside of the carrier with the J-25070 heat gun to ease pinion cartridge removal. Once the carrier is warm enough to allow the metal to expand, remove the pinion cartridge. In order to prevent damaging the cartridge or carrier surfaces, pry only on the stepped flanges of the housing. Once the pinion cartridge is out, remove the carrier from the J-42173 holding fixture. With the fingers of the J-42173 holding fixture facing up, mount the ring gear and differential case onto the tool. The fingers of the J-42173 prevent the housing from turning as you remove the differential ring gear bolts. Once the ring gear is removed, attach the J-42159 to the right side case bearing. Now, take the case assembly to a hydraulic press and use the J-42162 side gear compressor tool to press the bearing from the case. Once the bearing is removed, separate the right and left sides of the differential case. Remove the left output shaft and side gear from the left case half. Remove the left clutch pack. Note the position and direction of the Belleville washer. Then tag the clutch pack. Next, remove the bearing from the left side case using the J-42162 and the J-42159. Then, remove the C-clip and the left side gear from the output shaft. You now need to compress the right clutch pack in order to remove the crosspin from the case. This is done by using the J-42162 to compress the clutch pack and remove the crosspin. Once the crosspin is removed, raise the press and remove the spider gears and the output shaft with the right side gear. Remove the right clutch pack. Once again, note the position and direction of the Belleville washer. Then tag the clutch pack. Next, Move to the right differential side cover. Install bearing race remover J-42194 and then tighten the tool securely in position under the race. Now, press the race out of the cover. Once removed, tag the shims. Next, take the left carrier cover and install the J-44616-2 beneath the bearing. Then, attach a J-23907 slide hammer and remove the bearing. Now, remove the left side bearing race using the J-42194 and a hydraulic press. The pinion cartridge assembly is next to be disassembled. First, position the J-42164 into a vise. Then, install the cartridge assembly onto the J-42164 and unstake the pinion nut. Install the J-42172 into the pinion nut and remove it from the cartridge assembly. Now, press the pinion and bearings from the housing using the J-42162. Next, using the J-42166 and a press, remove the inner bearing from the pinion. Once this is done, using the J-42194 and a hydraulic press, remove the drive pinion inner and outer races from the pinion housing. This completes the disassembly of the differential. Clean and inspect all the parts, looking for wear and damage. Replace parts as required. During differential reassembly, precise measurements are required to correctly set gear position, preload, and backlash. Let's look at the measurement and setup procedures. Begin by placing the carrier housing onto the J-42173 and attach with 4 bolts in the holes provided. Next, start the pinion depth adjustment procedure by installing the J-42168-1 into the carrier left side race bore. Place the gauge cylinder holding strap J-42168-9 to the rear of the race bore and use the thumb screw to hold the J-42168-1 in position. Install the inner bearing race into the drive pinion housing using bearing race installer J-42172. Then, install the outer bearing race into the pinion housing using bearing race installer J-42170. Assemble the pinion bearings, spacer, and the J-42168-2 and the J-42168-11 axle shim selector tools into the pinion housing. Tighten the tools together until the retaining bolt is snug. Cleaning the flange area of the pinion housing and the mating surface of the carrier is required for an accurate measurement. Then, install the pinion housing into the pinion bore. Once the housing is seated, install all of the pinion housing bolts. It's important that all the bolts are installed and tightened according to service information. Failure to do so will result in inaccurate measurements. Once this is completed, use a feeler gauge to measure the distance between tools J-42168-1 and J-42168-2 as shown here. Now, inspect the ring gear to locate 2 numbers identified as A1 and A2. These numbers are the manufacturing variations of the ring gear and the pinion gear. After this measurement is completed, remove the J-42168-1 and J-42168-9 tools from the carrier. Next, assemble the ring gear and differential case, installing the side gears, clutch packs, and assembling the case halves is basically the reverse of the disassembly procedure shown earlier. However, when installing the left and right side differential case bearings, use the J-42170 bearing race installer. Once this is completed, the ring gear position and preload must be set. To do this, first position the J-42168-7 depth gauge into the hole of the J-42168-2. Place the J-42168-7 plunger tip against the bottom of the bearing bore. The tip should be positioned onto the flat machined surface of the bore. Now, tighten the J-42168-7 set screw to lock the plunger in position. Next, place the J-42168-13 gauge plate assembly in a vise with the gauge block facing up. Install the bearing race onto the J-42168-13 and then position the ring gear and differential case assembly onto the J-42168-13. Rotate the assembly and make sure that the left side bearing is seated in the race. Insert the tapered end of the J-42168-7 into either one of the two oil holes of the ring gear and differential case assembly. Rotate the case until the J-42168-7 plunger is positioned above the measuring block. The measuring block has two steps on it. Each step is used for measuring the clearance for a different axle ratio. Refer to the service information to determine which step you must use for the differential you are working on. Use a feeler gauge to measure the distance between the J-42168-7 plunger and the measuring block on the J-42168-13. Using the preceding measurements and available service information, calculate the shim pack thicknesses for the pinion cartridge and the left differential side bearing race. Remove the pinion housing with J-42168-2 and J-42168-11 from the differential carrier and install the shim pack and left side bearing race using J-42170. Next, place the ring gear and differential case assembly into the carrier. Install the bearing race onto the right side bearing, then position the J-42168-15, which is the side bearing shim selector tool, on top of the ring gear and differential case assembly. Next, place the cover on top of the J-42168-15. Install the three J-42168-16 spacers and supply bolts. Then, tighten them to the right side cover torque specifications in the service manual. Once the bolts are tight, rotate the differential case several times by turning the left output shaft. This will seat the bearings. It is important that the hex on top of the J-42168-15 is not used to rotate the differential assembly, or the measurement will be incorrect. After seating the bearings, measure the clearance at the top of the J-42168-15 tool with a feeler gauge. Next, select a shim pack equal to the feeler gauge measurement. You can verify the shim pack size by inserting the selected shims into the J-42168-15. Now, remove the bolts. The three J-44678-16 spacers, the right side cover, and the J-44678-15 shim selection tool. When this is done, install the bearing race and shims into the right side cover using the J-42170. Next, press the left side output shaft bearing into the left carrier cover using the J-42157. Then, install the left side output shaft seal into the cover using the J-44677. The final subassembly to be put together is the drive pinion assembly. Place the pinion onto the J-42164 on a press bed. Then, install the front drive pinion bearing using the J-42170. Now, assemble the pinion, bearing spacer, pinion housing, and rear bearing. While using the J-42164 for support, press the rear bearing onto the pinion using the J-42170. Next, place the J-42164 in a vise and place the pinion assembly onto the J-42164. Then, install the drive pinion nut onto the pinion assembly. Tighten the pinion nut to service information specifications using the J-42172. Once the nut is torqued to specifications, use a punch to stake it in position. This finishes the setup of the differential. All that remains is to assemble the various sub-assemblies into the differential carrier. Refer to service publications for additional information. By following the procedures shown in this video and those described in the service publications, you will quickly master the skills needed for servicing the Getrag Differential.